And yeah, Bernadette, welcome.
Thank you. So my understanding is we'll go till 10 to the hour, then there's a 10-minute break. Is that correct? Okay. So all of SOFA housekeeping is done, or do you need time at the end? Just want to confirm as well, Anna.
I would leave it up to you, really, if you would still need a few extra minutes. If not, we can just keep that little bit of time for less comments and things like that.
Great. Okay, so welcome everybody. Before I give my introduction, I would love to meet you a little bit more. I think a lot of us were in the opening talk, which was amazing. So nice to arrive with that energy present, isn't it? But if you could put in the chat so we can get to know each other a little bit better as well here. What inspired you to come to this session? Or it could be, and also your location, just so we can see in case people want to connect in similar locations. What inspired you to come to pop into this session, and or any questions that you hope will be answered? And if I don't get to them right away, for sure, I'll look it's going to be a good amount of time for Q&A and looking at a worksheet together. So hopefully it'll be interactive. I won't speak more than 30 minutes, so we'll have lots of good time I really would love discussion and exploration of the topic together. So we can go ahead and in the chat where you're sitting right now, by way of orienting ourselves to each other, what inspired you to join today, and or any questions you hope will be addressed. And I'll start too. Oh, I'm going to read instead of typing. Okay. Some impulse, great, love it. Spontaneity is good. And then maybe, Anna, you could help me if there are some good, like, not good, but if there are some specific questions in there, I wonder if you could grab them and help me find them again at the end. That would be wonderful.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. And then I'll try to read through and you all can look too. Okay, some people new to Sociocracy. That's good for me to know. Tech company, intentional communities. We have a lot of different. Hi, Mary. Good to see you again. Okay, so without further ado, I'll let those come in and Anna will help me collect them. I love, yeah, you were drawn to the messiness and complexity of human beings trying to work together, even with a great structure like Sociocracy. So hopefully we get to all of those areas and have lots of good discussion at the end. What new practices can be brought into organizations? Yep. And I think today it won't be so much, the practice today is going to be the practice of creating a ways of working agreement with your team. So we won't actually talk about the specific practices that might be inside of that document, just to clarify. Yeah. And how to introduce, okay, new ways in the social justice groups. Okay, perfect. Thank you, everybody. So I'll jump in just with a short intro. Nice to meet you all and see you again if we've already met. I'm a Sociocracy consultant. I work with organizations, helping them transition from being a traditional organization into being a sociocratic organization, or just when they're starting out as well, helping them start out with these structures as well. I think what makes my approach unique is that I combine culture and capacities. I mean, sociocracy is culture, right? But going more deeply into what are the waters that we swim in, and then what are the inner capacities that we need. And I'm passionate about that because I have a background as a mind-body therapist as well, in something called emotional freedom technique, if you're familiar with that, tapping, which you could never say years ago, that I would just be sort of it was so, now things are just so much more open in terms of using alternative practices, even in organizations and with directors and executives and leaders. So I'm telling you, I do tapping with some of my leaders. So I just find that so refreshing and exciting how much things have changed also for the good, even with all of the stress that's happening in the world. And I also bring in something called immunity to change. That's Robert Keegan and Lisa Leahy out of Harvard. It's in a more progressive way, you could say, of handling our individual and collective resistance to change. And then helping the organization be a deliberately developmental organization. Also a Keegan and Leahy reference there. It's basically about how to be a learning organization. If you want any more information on anything that I'm name dropping here or approaches that I'm mentioning, I'm happy to stay on and give you links at the end. So stay on and I'll get you any links you want from any of these other areas that we won't be talking about today. What else? Also was in the first SOFA cohort for being a certified sociocracy trainer, I think back in 2019. So if you ever have questions about that, happy to answer that as well. Okay, hopefully that was a short and sweet intro. Let me go to my screen sharing and we'll jump right in. Let's see. Okay, so there you go. Everybody can see it okay? Good, wonderful. All right, so creating culture, new ways of working, and sociocracy. Let's just start with a quick view of the areas as I see it. It's like a holistic way of working with sociocracy. That structure, of course, is sociocracy up here at the top of the triangle. And then culture, what we're going to talk about today, which also dives into capacities. What are we talking about when individuals come together to work together, create something together? What kind of inner capacities or collective capacities might we need? That connects to the ways of working agreements that we're going to talk about. And I call these kinds of organizations a self-managing developmental organization, an SDO. So some of you are new to sociocracy. This is just for shared understanding. We're not going to go into any of this today, but the structure part, the power with, would be the tenets of sociocracy, which most of you probably already know. The decentralization, inclusion, consent decision-making, double linking circles, our meeting practices and circle roles, transparency, and usually that's around flow of information. In a developmental organization, there's also more transparency around your inner process, your inner development. And in that case, it requires a really curated culture for that to feel safe enough and have enough trust and enough embedded practices to make that safe and efficient to do. Continuous learning through feedback, ownership, and constitution and bylaws. All of that is sort of, we're going to put aside for the rest of the conversation. We want to let you know it's part of that triangle, and we can't just do one or the other. They all go together. If any of you need examples of constitution or bylaws, I can give you that at the end as well. So let's focus in on culture and capacities then. So several years ago now, I was exploring with some colleagues, Francois Nuckel and Laureen Golden, and we were deeply exploring these questions. What individual and collective capacities are needed for sociocracy to work well? And then how can we build an organizational culture to support those capacities? So everything goes hand in hand, the individual, the collective, the structure, and the waters that we swim in. So Francois and I started compiling like laundry lists of capacities that we'd been gathering over the years from clients and colleagues, and then from our own direct experience working with organizations and teams. Because we felt so strongly that, sociocracy is not a standalone practice. I mean, that's what this conference is about, that it really is part of an ecosystem of ways of working and being together. So how might a team agree on these, on what is this social learning? What are these ways of working? And how can we hold these with care and integrity? And that's kind of what we're focusing on today. It's not so easy. This is getting into that gray area of the messiness of human beings being together. It's not just like you can, implement a structure and then boom, it just runs itself. It helps tremendously. And that's why I'm so passionate about sociocracy. I mean, you're 70% of the way there, but you got to finish the rest of the picture there. So one of the inspirations out of these deep conversations with Francois, he said, well, it sounds like we're talking about this colleague letter of understanding. It's called a CLOU. Has anyone ever heard of that? It's very old school. Laureen, I see a hand. I can't see everybody, but yeah, it's this old school from the Morningstar Company, featured in Laloux's book, Reinventing Organizations. And basically, it was the what and the who of coordinating and organizing themselves. A completely flat organization, by the way, which you don't have to be if you're sociocratic, but they were. So they really needed things to be really transparent and easy for people to navigate self-organizing. It included what they're personally responsible for, their mission, stepping stones, etc. And in this case, the colleagues would sign the document of these agreements to make it, really land like you would with sociocratic bylaws. So this is where the inspiration came for the ways of working agreements, which to me was more like the how. So how do we work together? So I just called it, and everybody kind of liked WOW, the acronym WOW, for ways of working. So you're welcome to adopt that. So after sifting, this will all be in a handout that we'll look at together shortly at the end. But everything kind of got distilled down to these general categories from these listen, then working with clients and experimenting and trying it out and testing it. So learning and development always seemed to come in there as a strong aspect, self-awareness. Of course, you have inclusion, diversity and power, connection and trust, being solutions focused, collaboration. And of course, collaboration is sociocratic, right? But it's like, how do we collaborate? Interrelationship, which relates to conscious communication. How are we relating together? How do we want to do celebration as a team, as an organization? And not only do we give feedback, but how do we give feedback? That's always tricky. And it's really getting more transparent about all of this, including your learning edges, like I mentioned, in being a developmental organization or a learning organization. How do we self-manage ourselves? What does that look like? How do we show up in meetings? Not just the meeting structure. What else do we value inside of how we are in a meeting together? And lastly, like I mentioned, psychological safety is becoming increasingly known to be important for us to really show up as who we are at work. Okay, let's move on. So let's briefly talk about the difference between working agreements and ways of working agreements and values and principles. When I was kind of looking at materials for this talk, I came across actually an article from TED, and that article is called "Why I Don't Want to Talk About Values and Principles." It was so timely, it was so perfect. It's like, okay, I have to throw this in because it's like the objection in the room, possibly. So let's call it out and talk about it. In general, values and principles can be too broad, like something like people care. So it's difficult to even for people to really, in practicality, understand what it's about. And yet, if you get too specific, it becomes a policy and very difficult to implement, given different contexts, because values and principles typically lack context. So the other argument that he had was, shouldn't universal values apply everywhere? Like, all values matter, but they shift in importance based on the context, right? Like kindness and generosity in one case, maybe most of us, we do want to be kind. But on the other hand, there's times that something the way I behave might not look generous, but it's about boundaries and setting limits. So it's all contextual. So let's keep going. So from Ted's article, I pulled this quote: "The truth is that we don't act because a given principle tells us to, but we do a certain thing because we've discerned that given this context and what we care about, this is the principle that seems the appropriate one to hold up in that moment." So values and principles become descriptive, not prescriptive. So I thought that was a great to just set our shared understanding of what we're talking about here. Because to me, and I've spoken to, like, I've kind of tested this out with lots of different people, this topic, because there's lots of different opinions about it, whether it can work or not. The issue is that you really can't codify values. You can write them down, but how do you do them? And the map is never the territory. Any agreements will always only be a representation of reality. They can't really keep up with the complexity of reality. For example, inclusion. How do we do that in practice? It's going to change given each moment, each circumstance of what inclusion looks like. So you can't prescribe how to be inclusive, really, right? You can state it. And other questions people have brought up, like the question of enforcement, and are there consequences for not doing the things that you value? The answer is that it's not a policy or a prescription again. These are agreements, they're not rules. They create opportunities like to discuss, to come together, and to evolve either the agreement or ourselves or both. Because people working together probably already share a set of values about how they want to work together, but it's about making those more conscious and more transparent. And if you want Ted's full article, I'll give you that link at the end. So ways of working agreements, what are they? They are different from values or principles, but they may contain them. They are a type of social contract. We've already discussed some of the key aspects they include, so all of this human stuff, I won't list it, but it can also include some self-management stuff, decision-making, but again, like I said, that are different from the bylaws or the Constitution. So let's just look at an example that makes it so much easier. So we'll pop over here. I'm going to take a sip of water. Here's an example from The Purpose of Recovery. What I like about this is that they show their vision and mission, right? This is on their website. And then you have the values. You can see and really feel as you kind of look at these, how you feel when you read them. They're external facing, although they do reflect how they want to work together internally. And you know, it's public, right? It's on their website. So it has a certain feel to it. Certainly important. You have Extinction Rebellion, our principles and values. We need a regenerative culture. Again, outwardly focused, but will also impact the internal culture naturally. But it's very general and very broad, just giving you examples. Now let's look at an example of a very rough ways of working agreement. This is actually the UK government, a blog on the UK Gov website, which is super interesting. And what they did was said, hey, we thought it would be good to be explicit about the things that those of us who have been here for a few years take for granted. So feel this in your body when you read this list. They made a list of what it's okay to do. It's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to ask why and why not. It's okay to forget things. So you can feel the difference in this, can't you? They're both necessary and valid. You need both. And a good place to start is with maybe the external facing one and the more general broad, and then go to your ways of working agreements. But you don't have to do it that way. If you don't have those, don't sweat it. You could start with this, and I'm going to show you how to do that today. Okay, so let's go back to our slide. How's everybody doing? Tracking? Okay, give me a thumbs up or a okay, I see the thumbs up. Great. And then let's see, time. Yeah, I want to make sure. So we have to end at 10 to, yeah, let's go 10 more minutes and let's go to Q&A. Okay. So how to do it? You can do it lots of different ways. This is just the way that I've been experimenting with clients on how to co-create your WOW agreements. So we did it over a series of 4 sessions. Obviously, you always set your intention, put your aim first. It's how we intend to work together. The aim is to build personal and organizational strength, resilience, and well-being. We want to gain clarity of what we expect of each other in the organization. And provide a way of getting back on track when things don't feel like they're in line with our agreed ways of working. So it's really a reflection tool that has such a different energy than a policy. right? So that's important to hold because we don't want to start, like we said, prescribing how people are supposed to behave. That is not going to feel good for anybody. And no one wants to have to show up at work and have to be a certain way. So we have to really hold these with care, almost like it's sacred. This is not black and white, it's more fluid, but it's about clarity and consciousness at the same time. And it's optional if you want your members to sign the document and how you want, and obviously a question about how to onboard new people. So how I did it was, in that first session, we started with individual time for reflection. So I asked people to, bring paper and pen and think of a time when you felt empowered to do your job after working collaboratively or after discussing your work with a team member. Maybe that was easier to answer. These are stories and memories that I wanted to evoke because it comes then from within rather than a list of some external thing that we all think we should be doing because it sounds good and it's the right thing to do, or we've been raised that way, or I want to try to get outside of that and get to the real and get to stories, which always hold the heart and always keep things grounded and real. The next question was, think of a time in your work when you felt less empowered or things were a bit more challenging. This will all be in your handout, so don't worry about taking notes, although feel free. So again, they would write down their own kind of notes about that. And then we would go into breakouts to share in partners. So again, kind of an intimate, private space. You don't have to announce it to the whole group. You don't have to reveal it to anybody. But the goal was to start coming up with possibilities that, from your observations and memories, what ways of working are important to you. So again, it comes from within. And even though some new members won't have gone through this process, you're still going to get the culture will be represented by the words of the people who did start to create these. And of course, it will change over time. So it's something that has to be revisited in like a living document. So from there, you would think of 2 to 4 practical statements of how you'd like to work together. And there were a few guidelines around that. I'm going to show you an example because I also gave them kind of a general list of how to start, because it might have been hard for people to, it can be hard for people to come up with these statements just from scratch. And why reinvent the wheel? However, then you don't want to err on just copying these and not really creating your own culture, essence in your culture's words. But this is just kind of a starting point. But you can see it's kind of general. It's not really emphasizes transparent. It's very, kind of generic. So you would want to really customize this. Let's see. So what we did then in the next sessions is then you put it into, let me go back to you put it into those statements into a table and kind of categories. And in the next sessions, we went into breakout groups of like 3 or 4 people, and people would put X's by the statements that they felt were strongest for them. This group put in their links that they already had around communication, like generative dialogue, NVC, things like that. From there, we compiled all the ones with the most X's, and we put them into a consent table. And here's an example. Here's where we get more into some of the detail. Like in this particular team, they didn't want to just talk about self-awareness and then self-care. They wanted to share the details of how each of them do self-care, just to give each other ideas. And the list was longer than this. And so that's what that team wanted. They wanted that detail. So it's so much easier to engage with this. For me, it is. It takes it from the abstract down to, oh, yeah, I didn't even think of that. It seems obvious, take time for breaks. But the detail, using coping skills, okay, just simple things, but outlining it more specifically helped to ground it. This can take time because there was some rewriting involved from the statements that we collected. So we then moved to completing it asynchronously with the consent table and with a helping circle. And this, I just wanted to give you another example of how the team wanted more detail on how. Like, how do we do accountability, and specifically how do we self-manage? I love these questions that emerged from the discussion that, like, we ask ourselves. We don't wait for a boss or an HR person to be tracking us. We say, hey, is my position the right fit for me? We ask that regularly. We check in with ourselves. Do I hold myself accountable instead of expecting others to hold me to account, etc. So it's, again, it really took the mystery out of, because we use these words, but do we really know what they mean, what it means to self-manage? It takes the mystery out of some of this new language that we have, that we assume, oh, well, everyone gets it. Well, fortunately, we had people on the team that said, what do you mean? Like, exactly. So we had to take the time to find our words for it, which really helps create the culture. So then what we did was, post sessions, we put everything into a summary. And we actually used, it can get quite wordy, especially when you do it as a team. So we asked AI to summarize all of our statements into a summary. It was brilliant. Takes out all the redundancies. But then you still have to work it through. Again, your helping circle would do that to make it your own words, because sometimes it doesn't translate. But it was super helpful and saved so much time. You know, when you synthesize a proposal, AI is pretty good at that. Here's an example we'll look at of what it looked like when it was synthesized, and you'll have a link to this. So now this is much more personal than the first example you saw. It has we in there, why it's important for the team. It's just not so general, much more specific to their culture and what they valued. Okay. Go back, almost wrapping it up here. So, yeah, I wanted to wrap up with this example, because, you know, we always talk about things like connection and trust and how important it is, but it can so easily just become a platitude. You know, of course we value that, you know, the poster on the wall. And for this team in particular, it was the farthest thing from that. Because of their deep discussions of working on it together, it was like in their body. It wasn't just something that they pasted onto something. Shortly after we worked on this team's ways of working document together, there was a super stressful situation that happened in the office that caused a breakdown in trust in the team, like pretty significant, wasn't a small thing. And I was working one-on-one with the person, the key person who was affected by this. And if we hadn't worked on these wows of working agreements and had things like this really written out from the heart, I think we would have lost her. And it would have been a great loss to the organization. But because we had done this work, it's worth the investment. I mean, it was 4 sessions of 2 hours, just to give you that. She said, you know, I know this team values trust because of the work we did on the ways of working agreements. And so I'm going to take the time to meet with each person individually, and I'm going to work this through. And she was willing, you know, it gave her that courage and actually trust that we do have trust, even though I don't feel there's trust. Do you know what I mean? But that agreement gave her that courage to say, we said we value this. I'm going to go for it, instead of just sort of like protecting herself and walking away, which would have been, I think if we hadn't done the work, I think it would have been a reasonable choice. So I just wanted to give you that example of why it's worth it and worth the effort. Okay, so we're going to go into our Q&A, and we're going to work off of this handout. So I'm going to put it in the chat, and you can start taking a look at it. So I think I'll stop share and just start putting links in the chat for you all. Whoop, chat. Okay, so here's the first one. All right, and let me pull it up so I have it in. And then also, before we get, so I'll give you a moment to start looking at that. And I'm just going to put my contact information in case we don't get to everything today, that you have it and you can find me, and please reach out, ask questions. We can get together. We can continue, you know, the conversation, whatever you need. Okay. All right. So I put my LinkedIn on there. And I think those are probably, you know, LinkedIn is probably the best way to find me. And I'll just put my email. So are you taking a look at the handout? Are you able to open it? Okay. And there's my email. Okay, done with that business.
Bernadette, there's also already a few questions on the chat. You want to get to those a little bit later?
Let's start now. That's what it's all about. And
Okay.
then if you didn't get to, then hopefully we'll get to like you talking, not just me answering also. But let's try to do both.
Faye wanted to know in those comments right at the beginning as to why people were coming here. Faye wanted to know what new practices can be brought into organizations.
So more specific practices. Yeah. So we weren't going to spend a lot of time on the specific practices, but you saw some of them in that one document, like things like from Otto Scharmer's generative dialogue. That's one that I use a lot. How do we actually not just go into debate or automatic pilot in our listening and speaking? So that's a really, I think, foundational tool that goes with sociocracy. Reflective listening is another one that we use a lot that is just invaluable. These are sort of like the basics. NVC, of course, like SOFA, encourages us to use with sociocracy. And then I would add in there some kind of, well, because it's my passion, some kind of inner development work and personal development as part of the organization. I vote for that one. Like immunity to change, put in a pitch for that, okay? Safe with, because it's so accessible. I gotta tell you, if anybody wants to talk about that more afterwards, we can. It's such an accessible and safe way to do the deeper inner work. Kate doesn't think so, maybe. Or Kale, is that your name? Yeah, I have found it. Sorry, I saw your face. I didn't know if it was response to what I was saying. Okay, we'll go back to the written, but let's go to Eduardo since he has his hand up.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay.
It's a little garbled. Try again.
Hello. Close microphone. Better.
I think so. Yeah, more or less.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for the talk. As you saw, many of us are very interested on the topic. And I'm sorry I'm connecting, but I'm sensible with my talk after. So, did you know the difference in the type of issues that appear in different types of organizations? For example, in my case, many times I have to work with people from groups that appear very different, like people from design or engineers, and they're usually male. That's why I said engineers. And most of these engineers really are electing this not only because they like it, but because they dislike working with people. So it's my code. I work with my code. You know how it is. Probably all of you have seen this. So do you perceive a difference among these groups, or how do you approach this? Your approach is super clear. Absolutely sensible, right? It works, but probably with different groups, you have to tweak some things. How's your experience with that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a great question because that is going to come up. And because there are cultures within cultures, right? Even in a small organization with 20 people, I've already seen there's for sure 2 cultures within that one culture, and they're very different. So it's not like you can escape it just by being a small team. You won't. But with a small team, it is easier to do, I think, just one process together because it actually, in the case of one client, it really brought the cultures together by doing this process together. Because they saw, oh, we have a lot more in common than we thought. So there was a lot less adversity than I thought. Because yeah, a lot of it ends up becoming the human beings in the room versus I do this and you do this and I'm so different than you. It really highlights the commonality. So it really created a lot of safety and trust just by doing the process together. Now the question becomes, how do you integrate new members who don't go through that process together? Which is what we're kind of going to be exploring next, if anyone has ideas on that. And I'll answer one more thing, Eduardo. In a larger corporation, though, it might be advisable to do this process for just say like the tech team and then just the marketing team. If that team is large enough, and then maybe you do another process where you find the merging of those separate agreements. I think that would be the way to go there.
Thank you very much. We did actually in our intentional community, and it was a lot of work. So I can imagine what it is on a corporate environment. So thank you very much for sharing.
You're welcome. It is, but it's worth the work. I think we had Sheila next, yes? Or
We
Adam?
also have 4 questions on the
Okay.
chat, one of which from Sheila.
Is
So I
Sheila.
don't
So we'll
know
go with
you-
Sheila and then I'll look at the chat and then we'll come back to Andreas. Okay.
Yeah, so this is the
Hi.
same question that I put in the chat. Could you talk about when you're beginning to work with a client organization, the order that you do things? Do you start with the working agreements before you teach them sociocracy? Do you do other things first? Do you go back and forth?
Yeah, great question. I don't start with the ways of working agreements because why? We want to also know how to listen to each other and make decisions together first before we go into these deeper waters. So teaching the basics, starting with, even if they're not going to implement sociocracy fully, that's okay. There's a lot of organizations that are like, hey, we're going to do, slowly into the waters. We can't do the whole, fine. But you're going to start learning how to speak in rounds, how to do reflective listening, how to have self-awareness, things like that, so that in the room, people have a certain, even if they don't have the competency yet, they've been invited to step in and practice that together. And then we can reference that when we're not doing that. Hey, do you remember we said we were going to? So then I weave them. So I start with basic sociocracy, but quickly go into capacities. And then usually I do culture after those two, but like not too far, like 6 months in. So then you're starting to weave pretty soon those 3 areas of the triangle. You don't want to tip too far for too long, like only work on structure for so long and then we're not addressing the capacities. Really within 2 months, I start working on capacities. And then weave back to structure and then weave back. Does that answer your question, Sheila?
It's a start. I might want to have a longer conversation with you about this.
Sure, I'm happy to. Yeah, you have my email. Send me an email
Yeah.
or LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll go to Andreas.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for your talk. I'm very curious. You mentioned, and I think it's my experience as well, that the process of crafting this already changes a lot, and because people talk about it and then they change. But also, I always am very curious, how do you bring this to life after it's there, so that it's not just written on the wall somewhere? And I work with, we developed a program called the 7 Muscles of Self-Organization, and it is a bit of like a training program that works like a muscle training. We say, okay, how do we cultivate trust? How do we sit with tensions? How do we become comfortable with complexity? All these things, and that's one way, the micro practices to do it. But I'm sure there's a lot more, and I'm just wondering, what do you do to, once these wow agreements are there, to keep them or bring them to life?
Yeah, how do you keep it alive that it doesn't, yeah. So it has to be reviewed regularly, like quarterly would be a good mark. You don't want to, you want to be able to live into it and practice it and not think about it. Also, you don't want to obsess on it, but you want to show up, do your stuff, and then check back in. How are we doing? So any retrospective that you would be doing anyway, I would build in reviewing the document, the agreements again. Like, how did we show up in that process based on the ways we've agreed to work together? And don't let it go too long. Anytime a retrospective is due after a process or a project completion, or also annual reviews, performance reviews. So we bring in some of the aspects, like even non-tangible contributions, which is another thing, but that's part of it. Did I embody these agreed ways of working, and in what ways? And that's actually acknowledged. So that's another way to keep it alive. But yeah, it's so easy to just then put it in the Google Drive and move on. So that's what you don't want to do. So it does take concerted effort, actually, and that you actually you care about this and you want to keep it alive. Someone has to be kind of stewarding it in a way if the others forget. So you kind of need, you know, that hero. It'd be great if everybody was, but invariably you're going to forget about it after you put it in the Google Doc. So, okay. Did that answer your question, Andreas?
Thank you. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So I see Aurelia has a question. Let me see if I can go to the chat first.
I can help you with that, Kale's
thank you.
question. We have actually 2 technical questions about the things that you will share at the end, so maybe I will leave those questions to the end. But Kale was asking what the ideal time is to create an organization's first wow, and that she's imagining several months or up to a year into the operations, but perhaps as the inception of an organization.
Yeah, I mean, it really does depend on what they're up against, but so let me think. A lot of startups will already have, because they sort of have to pull people together and attract people, they're already will have some set of values listed. They know what kind of culture they want to create, or they wouldn't be starting a new organization. You know, they're trying to do something more, you know, organizations today are more conscious about that. But I get what you're saying, because also then there'll be a ton of operations to do in a startup, especially in that first year. But I think taking the time to do this, there's no prescription for when, and there's just not. It just is really, a lot of it's following your intuition and what the team is needing. Like if there's a lot of separation and people you're like, okay, you know what? We're going to stop working on whatever aspect of organizational development you're working on, and we're going to block out these ways of working sessions and just block them out. They're on the calendar. You don't have to get it all done at once, but if they're scheduled, let's just say every month you chip away at it is another way to do it. So you just get creative, but you make it a priority as needed, and it will be different for every organization. But I wouldn't spend hours and hours and hours and hours right in the beginning, because there's so much to do and get done there. You're going to lose them. You're going to lose them. They'll be like, forget about it. This is too much I can't even remember. I'm learning 3 roles right now, and now you want me to be this amazing human being at the same time? No, you're just going to hit their resistance to change. So it's a lot of common sense on the timing. I don't know how else to say that. Yeah. Intuition. Don't overload or overwhelm. It can become overwhelming. It's like becomes a long list of how we're supposed to behave or something. You don't want it to become that. Yeah, but it's tricky, not so easy. Aurelia, yes.
Hi. My question is about this is a methodology that you already developed yourself, or it's a part of something bigger. There are much more methodologies that you can apply, and specifically if it's really sociocracy, or is also used by some other models like holacracy. Since I'm working in a company that is based on a holacracy model, and I'm really interested in the differences of these 2 kind of methodologies.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, the ways of working agreements would apply to any organization, really, whether they're using holacracy, whether they're flat or hierarchical, it doesn't matter. These are making more conscious and transparent how we want to be together, accomplishing this aim, you know, in the context of work. So it applies to anyone, any organization. However, there are some that will just never embrace it. I mean, I know I could speak of a tech team that I'm personally involved with. They happen to operate pretty well together, and they it's almost like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. They're kind of in a place where, like, you know what, we're good. But if tensions start building, or there's conflict, or things aren't running as smoothly, they can then turn to this process to say, hey, I think we need to get a little bit more transparent about how we want to be together, because we're having different cultural issues come up, you know. So it's like that. And then I came up with this process myself. This is not based on research. It's just based on my own passion and talking with colleagues and unearthing it, because it was like, I felt like we kept expecting people to, show up, do sociocracy, learn to be empowered and find your voice and make decisions now. And you're not going to be told what to do. And just all it's like, what? It's completely different from how we were raised in my generation anyway, how we've been raised in school, in families and previous jobs that didn't do it that way. So suddenly you're asking me to like really step into a structure that I haven't been taught to do this, how to do this. So we felt like, wow, you can't prescribe, like we said, capacities, but can't we just try to find some words so we can start somewhere? And then we can disagree on it and we can change it, but at least we have something to start the conversation with. So that's kind of a tangent, but did that answer your question, Aurelia?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Actually, it's very interesting. So it's kind of addressing a personal strategies. I mean, like personal from the inside part of the people. So that's very interesting.
Exactly. And when they did that the story exercise, they can then draw upon something that didn't work, maybe in another organization. And now they have a voice to say, hey, I want it to be differently in this place of work, and now someone's even actually asking me. So it's, yeah, very
Thanks a lot.
empowering. Yeah. Okay, Anna, we can't do all the questions in a row, but maybe we could try to consolidate. I think we have still some time.
As far as I saw, we've covered all the questions on the chat. Then you have some comments that you might want to read through later.
Great.
Technical things that were asked in terms of the links that you said you could share at the end about immunity to change and all of those good
So
things.
let's do that. Yes, and then go ahead.
So it was that, the examples of constitution and bylaws,
Yeah, okay, sure, happy to. Okay,
the handout which you gave already.
the handout you have, yep, okay. All right, so let's just get those in. So in case you have to go, you can get those. And then I'm going to hang around if anybody wants to stay for a few minutes. So you have the agreement, Did anybody want, okay, let's see.
So there's more things. If you want
So
me
the
to keep
example,
going.
you wanted the example of bylaws, correct? Was that one of them?
Yes.
Okay, here you go. Here it comes in the chat, everybody. I don't know. See, it's a Google. It doesn't really tell you what it is. It's not a great link. That one was the bylaws. I'll try to put the name in front next time. Okay. Then for the Constitution, I only grabbed a holacracy Constitution, but you can see at least what they are doing because I think it's good to have references. Oops, Constitution.
Yeah.
There's that one.
And several people asked also for the government's website where there was those things. It's okay to.
It's okay to, yep.
Exactly.
Okay, so copied link. You wanted the immunity to change one, right?
As well. And Ted's article.
And Ted's article. Okay, good. Let's do this. So immunity to change. I'm going to call it ITC to shorten. This is the book, but it's a good place to start. It's fabulous. Being a developmental organization. I'm going to call it, it's called a deliberately developmental organization or a DDO. I'm going to put that, that's that. It's called an everyone culture. And then Ted's article.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And a few folks were asking also if you would be willing to share your slides.
Well, that's why I put really the relevant slides in the handout.
Yeah.
But let's see. Was there something specific that you wanted in the slides? Okay, and now the government, let's get this where is it? It was the example. Yeah, let me go back up. It was the example.
It's already on the chat, actually.
The UK one?
Yes.
Oh, great. Someone must have grabbed it. Oh, yeah, whatever. You're sure it's there?
Let me confirm the link.
Oh, it's okay. There it is. Yeah, thank you, Louise.
Loisel.
Louiselle.
I was so interested. I had to look online. I was like, oh, I need this.
You found it. Yeah,
Perfect.
Pretty sure. Yeah, it's okay to say what's okay. That was that one. Okay, and then
From my notes, that's all.
The intro slides, right. Okay, and then tapping, EFT tapping. That's a good question. I wasn't expecting to share that one, but let me, I have something here. And then while I'm pulling that up, we have 10 minutes, I think to move to your next place. But is there any other burning questions?
Thank you very much for sharing your practices and reflections.
You're welcome. Here's a handout on, you're very welcome, on the EFT. Copy link. It was called tapping, or it's also known as EFT. It is a great mind-body therapy practice that's really accessible. You can do it pretty much anywhere. Works with the nervous system and the energy system. It's a synthesis of psychology and energy medicine, basically. Yeah. Bye, Lauren. Thank you for coming. Okay.
Before everybody leaves.
Yes.
Well, Bernadette, I have a question, if that's okay.
Sure.
Hi, thank you so much. A lot of the principles I've studied in my team coaching practice here in England at Henley. They have a huge coaching center, a formal coaching center, and I'm sure you know people like Peter Hawkins and the rest who do a lot of principles in team coaching. So we do talk about the way of being and the way we work. You talked about generative dialogue. Now, when one Googles generative dialogue, a plethora of articles and information comes up. What could you suggest those of us who haven't formally read about generative dialogue or any models or structures we should start with?
Well, I did create a one-pager from Otto Scharmer's book. I think it's The Essentials of Presencing, I think it's called. So it is from the Presencing Institute, Otto Scharmer. Okay. That's specific form of generative dialogue that I was referring to. And I have a handout on that too. So let me just pull that up.
Very generous of you. Really appreciate your sharing.
Let's see. Yes, you're more than welcome. Okay, building new world capacities, generative dialogue. Here we go. And then it has links to kind of the follow-up stuff, and it also has links to, it gives you an overview of how to do it. And then it links to the Presencing Institute, which is easy to find as well. But I never found like a one-page summary. It's like, do I have to read ask everyone to read this book? I don't think so. Okay, so here's the generative dialogue. Okay, here you go.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That is, and I was also interested in, and I can email you afterwards, which I'm really keen to email you about a few things. But my question was, we have cultures within cultures.
Right.
And then we have the obvious intercultural conflicts especially in global organizations that bring other cultures together, like a US person, a Japanese person, which is my experience myself. And there's a lot of energy there for lots of conflict and miscommunication. So have you worked with the obvious intercultural teams, and what have you found really helpful in terms of that team coaching element of the way we work? Because firstly, you're dealing with people in the room who have totally different ideas of what a team is, how you work as a team. There's hierarchical bias, all of it. It's just a huge space.
It is. And those teams need to work closely together, those two different cultures. And we're talking about physically, literally cultures, not like
we're talking about physically literal
physical
cultures.
space, physical countries and physical,
So
that is a really good question. One of the things that there's been a research done on what really can help bring those various cultures together, and it is using the immunity to change process together, right? Because what happens is you find you'll bump into common humanity and borders disappear. It really has that effect. It's not easy, easy work necessarily, because people need to have enough trust that they can share their inner learning edges with people maybe, across the ocean.
Yes.
So there has to be enough safety and trust that in the process that they would be willing to do that. But if you can do that, then the culture works becomes much easier because you've already,
Right.
yeah. Bye. Thank you for those who are leaving.
Thank you so much, Bernadette.
I mean, that's one answer, but I'm sure there's other ways we could talk
Yeah.
about. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, we're on the
Yeah.
last few minutes and everybody's leaving already for the next one. So thank you so much again, Bernadette, and all of you for being here. It was a pleasure seeing you again. And yeah, have a wonderful rest of the day and lots of inspiring talks to see.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
Sherry. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Mary. I have a lot to read on the chat, so if we could leave it open for a second, I'm going
Yes.
to probably grab it into my notes.
Would you like me to save it and send it to you?
That would be great. Thank
Okay.
you. Just before, sometimes it goes away. I'm going to hang too for anybody who. Hi, Rhonda. Nice to see you.
I was just going to take a minute to check in with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's so good to see you. This was so great.
Oh, good. Thanks for the feedback. Yeah.
There's a piece.
Rhonda,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt. Let me just change hosting permissions with Bernadette to make sure that when I leave, your conversation doesn't end.
Great. Thank
Lovely.
you.
Okay, so I'm heading out.
Thank you, Anna, for the wonderful co-hosting. Thank you.
Lovely seeing
Done
you
it without
again.
you.
Mwah.
Yes.
And the
soon.
recording. Should we leave the recording going?
I think that technical part is all centralized in Sofa World. So I think if we leave, we can
I
just,
can stop it, actually. I'm going to stop it. Yeah.
okay,
Okay.
bye-bye.
Bye. And it says stop cloud recording. And I just, Rhonda, is that?
It says it's recording. Yeah, you should stop. I think if you
I
hit
can
stop
say
recording.
stop